Again, thank you all so much for joining us on our talk about tariffs. So to start, we should talk about what is a tariff. Tariffs are also known as duties. So if you've ever been in like an international airport and you've seen that like duty-free place, it's the same thing. They're used interchangeably. They're both a tax that are levied by governments on the value, including the freight and insurance. So that means the cost to ship it over, and then any insurance that was necessary on the shipment of anything that's imported. So different tariffs are applied on both different products and by different countries. We'll see that you can do it just on a country, like a flat tariff, or you can be specific on what is being imported from a country. So tariffs, along with other assessments, are collected at the time of customs and clearance in the foreign ports. That means here in America, if something's brought over to America, it's U.S. Customs that will assess and then charge the tariff. And so tariffs and all other kind of taxes will increase the cost of a product to the foreign buyer. So for us, we're the foreign buyer if something's coming over from China, from India, from Europe. And it can affect your competitiveness in a market. And so what does this look like in practice? So it's like actually think about a situation. So if the US has a 10% tariff specifically on avocados from Mexico, and a big grocery chain wants to purchase them and stock them in their store, the Mexican seller is going to factor in whatever that tariff is onto what the grocery store is going to end up paying. So if they want to put an order for 500 avocados, that would cost $1,000. Then the Mexican grower would add $100 to the purchase price. So they would go ahead and charge the US retailer $1,100. So this means that originally the cost of an avocado would be $2. Now it's $2.20 for the grocer. And so that means they're going to have to pass that on to the customer and then charge more for avocados inside the grocery store. And so what are tariffs commonly used for? So originally, they were really used to protect emerging industries. So when America was first a country, and we actually wanted to establish and grow our economy, we put taxes on textiles, iron, and steel because those were the businesses that we saw occurring in America at the time, and Britain was a big competitor. And so we tariffed textiles, iron, and steel coming over from Britain, which would encourage people to purchase American textiles, iron, and steel, and then also to start their own businesses in those industries. There also can be used as a negotiation tactic. So it's kind of what we see currently occurring. You put a tariff on a country, they don't want that tariff to be placed on their country because they want people to be buying goods from them. And so that kind of brings them to the table to actually engage in some kind of trade negotiations. They also have historically been used as a consequence for unwanted actions, kind of like a punishment. So after Russia decided to invade into Ukraine and begin their war with them, the EU put tariffs on goods from Russia. The idea behind this is that it will make it so people buy less things from Russia, Russia's economy, right? Less money's coming into the economy, and then Russia has less money to fund the war. And then also it's kind of like, we'll take rid of this tariff if you stop your invasion in Ukraine. It also can be used to compel certain behavior. So we'll see here right now, the US administration is talking about putting tariffs on Russian oil, people who buy Russian oil. And the idea there is we're saying, okay, we're going to put another tariff on you because you buy Russian oil. If you stop buying Russian oil, then we'll take this tariff away. And so how do they end up impacting an economy? So they can decrease stock prices, and that kind of has to do with all of the other effects that are happening that we'll talk about. They can lead to a shortage of goods. So if we go back and we think about avocados, if all of a sudden they cost more for US grocers to import, they might have to make purchases that are smaller. So they just have less avocados to sell. And then the idea is that hopefully they'd start to buy American avocados. But the problem is 90% of Americans' avocado consumption comes from other countries. There are also only 3 places that can really grow avocados in America, and that's California, Florida, and Hawaii. And Hawaii, again, there's not a lot of land mass there. So the idea is if there is a demand for avocados that we can't meet through imports, all of a sudden people will be, incentivized to, increase their farm production, have extra fields, start an avocado farm somewhere. But the problem is that takes a while. Avocados are a natural thing that need to grow. People need to have the resources to expand their farm, things like that. So that can take years. So in that time, there may become a shortage of avocados for us all to be able to buy. So like I said, hopefully it leads to local investment in your economy. Hopefully it means businesses are going to say, you know what, we'll come over and we'll start a factory, or yeah, I'll expand my farm because now there's a higher demand for American avocados, whatever you may have, cars, microchips, all the things. It can also, though, inversely lead to foreign disinvestment in an economy. So as we've seen with our tariffs on Canada kind of put together a grassroots boycott of American goods. They've even come up with apps to help them figure out and scan like how Canadian is a product, right? And they are actually one of the top buyers of American whiskey, I believe. And they were like, we're not selling it. We're taking it off the shelves. We're not stocking it anymore because we hurt their economy. And so they want to hurt us back. Hopefully, again, leads to increased purchases of locally produced goods. So hopefully we start buying the American-made whiskey. It's the problem there, again, we still could see higher costs of goods, which again leads to inflation. One, because you have to pay to directly import. Two, even if you produce things in America, let's say you own a craft beer business. You might be, brewing that beer, bottling that beer all in America, but you might still need to buy wheat from Canada, buy aluminum from Canada. So you're buying those raw materials, those are, subject to a tariff, and then you're producing your product. The tariff's going to have a smaller impact because you're not importing a whole good, which costs more, but it still will affect the company's bottom line. And so all of this can lead to an economic slowdown at the same time as inflation. Inflation is just things cost more. So we have inflation, right? An economic slowdown happens when there are less jobs, there's less investment in the economy. The hope is that that does not happen, that the tariffs actually increase investment in the economy. If they don't, then you have what we call stagflation, which is the combination of an economic slowdown and inflation, and multiple quarters of stagflation is what we call a recession. So you hope that doesn't happen, but it can. So what do these impacts mean for business owners? So like I said, it can lead to higher operating costs. You could be forced to do price increases because what you're buying is costing you more. And consumers will probably have less disposable income. If they're spending more at the grocery store, that means they have less money to spend at restaurants, at movie theaters, on, luxury goods, things like that. And then suppliers that you might be purchasing from might have less stock, so it gets more competitive. So what can you do? Unfortunately, not a ton. A lot of small business owners and economists talk about how tariffs affect small businesses first, and they affect small businesses the hardest. But you can try to find people who are local U.S. suppliers of what you normally sell. You can track tariffs and try to buy in bulk before an increase impacts the cost. Is what we've seen a lot of really big retailers do. In the news, you've seen them say, we've already got everything we need for Christmas. You don't need to worry too much about, your Christmas costs going up too much. But normally it is really those kind of big dealers that are able to do that. But because people have tried to buy in bulk, you might still be able to find products that you use at kind of pre-tariff prices. And the other thing is to find suppliers from countries with lower tariff rates. We'll talk about this. The tariff rates are kind of all over the place. If you normally get something from China that you could get from Indonesia, and Indonesia's at that 10%, while China's at 35%, right? You can switch it up that way. The last thing to do is to call Congress. I'll talk about this a little bit later when I explain kind of Congress's role when it comes to tariffs. So let's go over what is the current tariff landscape. It's been changing. I tried to update this as much as I can. August 1st, there were a bunch of updates, and the administration is often kind of changing what they're threatening to do. So as of right now, there were some new tariffs announced that will take effect on August 7th. Currently, if you were to place an order for an item by, the end of day tomorrow before the 8th, and it arrived in the US before October 5th, then that purchase would be exempt from these new increased tariffs. Canada, though, already has a 35% tariff rate in effect. Then we can see Mexico is going to be at 25%, and they have 90 days to negotiate with the Trump administration. Yes.
Is there a way you can send us this?
Yes.
To give you an email address?
Yes, absolutely. Everybody, when they signed up, we should have your email.
I didn't know you had to register.
Oh, okay. Then you can leave your email with me. Yeah, on a piece of paper, and I'll make sure. Yeah, and I'll make sure it gets to you. But yes, I totally plan to send these all out to you because there are some hyperlinks later in the slides. Yes, so Mexico is currently at 25%. The Trump administration has said they're giving them 90 days to negotiate, so there's not an additional 25% tariff laid on Mexico, which would bring them up to 50%. So China's very confusing, kind of all over the place. But currently, they are subject to the flat 10% rate. Trump did that to a lot of countries. Then they have a $50% tariff on aluminum, steel, and copper products. So that means things that like straight aluminum, steel, and copper, and then also things that use aluminum, steel, and copper. They've been asked for clarifications. They did say that the tariff would be based off the amount of like copper, steel, and aluminum that are in the product and not the full product itself, but we'll see how that kind of unfolds.
Can I ask you, basically, when I think of aluminum, steel, copper, things like that, I think of cooking ware, I think of refrigerators, dishwashers, all those things.
Yeah.
So the price on everything's going to basically double if you have 50% tariff on these things.
Yeah, that is true. Now, if we're talking about right now, what they're kind of saying is like, okay, if it's soda, we're going to charge you on like the aluminum for the can, but not the value of the liquid inside. Again, we'll see kind of how that practically unfolds and what happens there.
And where's all this money going that Trump is getting?
Yes, so tariff, the money that we take in from tariffs just goes to like the U.S. like revenue service. And so it's revenue that we have, and then yes, and because Congress is the power of the purse, they're the ones that should be able to dictate how we spend that money. But yes, it comes in kind of just like regular tax revenue. Yep. And so India currently has a flat 25% tariff, but Trump is threatening to increase that to 50% total because India purchases Russian oil, which fuels the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And so this is that case where he's saying, if you don't stop buying oil from Russia, then I'm going to tax you another 25%. This number has also been changing. At one point yesterday, he said he was going to make it 100%. And then recently today, he said 25%. So something to watch and be paying attention to.
Because when I watch the news at night, they keep saying that he's giving a 90-day extension. He's giving a 45-day extension. So he puts these things into effect, but then I don't know.
Yes, he's all over the place with it. So I do give some resources on some people who are like keeping lists to watch what's going on. And so the one thing is that as of tomorrow, unless something changes, unless he puts out kind of some kind of statement tomorrow, we know the 35% on Canada is in effect currently. Mexico's 25% is in effect. China, that 10% has been in effect for a while. The 50% will go into effect as of tomorrow. And the India 25% will go into effect as of tomorrow.
And why is China so low at 10% when everybody else is so high?
So he's been threatening back and forth with China about like 135 and things like that. And he is currently in talks with the Chinese government. And so that's why he put a pause on that. But those talks are ongoing. So you don't really know what he's going to do. That's why it says there's a pause, because of the negotiations. So he basically said, I won't levy a higher tariff on you until August 12th. And so hopefully China is now encouraged to negotiate with them and get to a deal before August 12th. So there's not a higher tariff rate. So basically, like if you engage in talks with the Trump administration, they have been nicer and put pauses on things. Yeah.
It seems like they concluded 15% for Europe. What was the tariff
before?
Yeah, because I imagine it's not zero. I mean, we just had this, we weren't starting at zero on any of these countries.
Yeah.
So Is it actually
I
more status quo than people actually think?
think 15 might be closer to normal, but 10% is actually like a pretty high tariff rate.
Yeah, but what was
So-
European tariff prior?
I'm not positive. I'd have to look it up.
I wonder if just like some of this is more
There is a little bit,
inflated in our heads of like higher.
some
I'm
of it,
sure
yes.
Some of it is,
Yeah.
the ones that-
He's threatening a pretty significant tariff on like luxury wines and goods and things from the EU, which that would have a pretty big effect. But in general, and we'll talk about, so there are people that are doing studies to kind of look at the landscape right now and are projecting out how much that would cost the American family. Oh, yeah, that's right here. So the budget lab at Yale, they study this and they look at this. And so across kind of all the tariffs that he announced on August 7th, and everything that's already in place, they've found that the average tariff that we will be across all kind of goods that we buy, that will be subject to is 18.3%. And then they went forward and calculated that that would come out to $2,400 more a year for like the average household on your average purchases.
Can I just ask, because this is where I get confused. I had honestly, before Trump became president, I'd never heard of tariffs.
Mhm.
So were there no tariffs in effect, or was all of this, like you were telling her, was all of this in effect before and I was just oblivious to it? This is where I'm confused.
So we did not have tariffs across the board like this. We have NAFTA in place, like we have trade agreements. One of the larger things that is kind of already impacting people is we used to have this de minimis exemption. So that was for like smaller companies. If you purchased, I think it was under $800, that would come in completely tariff free, right? So that's already affecting smaller businesses. But no, we've never had tariffs just like across the board, across all these different countries.
Specific goods.
Yes,
Like
yes.
Apple iPod
Yes.
had a specific tariff.
Yeah.
Well, no, because like Trump, I read that Trump has, increased the tariffs on Apple exponentially to try to get them to build their phones in the US, which
Yes.
they're not going to do anyway, but like,
Yeah.
but so the tariffs, that's where I get confused. So the tariffs were always there, we just never heard about it.
No. They were never quite at this level. So so here we know that the
So Canada
effective,
had no tariffs, and then it became 35%, or they had a lower tariff?
they had lower tariffs. So this whole effective tariff rate, do you see that's 18.3%? That would be the highest it's ever been in the US since 1934.
Okay.
So we are at a higher overall rate. I can't tell you exactly what everybody was at before or not. But yes, we have never seen tariffs across the board leading to like this level since 1934. So a long
Canada
time.
had a tariff, it just got increased to 25%. And Canada had a tariff, it got, okay.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
don't know what that number was before that. So it's estimated to be 18.3, but what
Yeah.
is the current, like what was it before this whole discussion?
I'm not 100% sure. There are definitely people who are mapping that all out and things like that. So that is findable. These are some resources that I found really helpful. So the BBC is currently actually tracking all tariffs. They have, I thought, oh, let me put up all the charts, but it would be so big and so overwhelming for everybody. Trump put tariffs over 90 countries. I think, over 90 countries. So they are tracking all of that, and you can go through there and see each individual. Then the International Trade Administration, they have a page that again kind of walks through what tariffs are, and it gives you resources to be able to search specific items to see what the tariffs are on them. And you can kind of do your own looking for specifically what matters to you and your business. Let me just check here. Admit. Perfect. But yes, I will be sending the slides out. So these are both hyperlinked as well. So, if you don't scan it now, or you'd rather look at it on your computer, because it's probably a better way to look at all this complex information, you'll have that available. So let's talk about the current political landscape of tariffs, because this is why things have been changing and kind of moving all over the place. So the first thing is, who actually has the authority to levy tariffs? The Constitution grants Congress the power to levy tariffs in Article 1, Section 8. Though Congress is always allowed to kind of give its powers to the executive. So Trump is asserting that this law that's from the 1970s is called the International Emergency Economics Powers Act. He's saying that that gives him the right to impose these tariffs. Originally, this was passed to allow presidents to seize assets and block transactions during a national emergency. Trump is asserting that our trade deficit with all these different countries is a national emergency. That alone is debatable. Trade deficits are not always a bad thing, especially the way that the Trump administration calculated our trade deficit. They only did it based off of like goods, exports and imports of goods. America is much more of a service economy. So we export different services, even like cloud services, things like that. So when you don't include that, that also increases our trade deficits, but also sometimes you just have a trade deficit. If you think about your employer, if you work for anthropology might pay you more than you buy in goods from anthropology, or maybe you buy a lot from anthropology more than they pay you. And so now you have a trade deficit, right? Like that's just what a trade deficit means. It is not inherently always a bad thing. So this use of EPA is currently being challenged in court. There's several states suing. There's some private lawyers who are suing, actually conservative private lawyers who are suing people who worked with Trump in his first administration because they're not happy about this. And so the courts could decide that judges have already mentioned that EPA actually doesn't mention tariffs at all. So they could just say, even if this trade deficit is an emergency, tariffs, levying tariffs is not one of the powers that is granted to you by EPA. They could argue that there's not actually a national emergency where you can even use EPA. And the other thing is that Congress could also just vote and revoke EPA altogether, which would clearly take away any authority Trump has to levy taxes and fully bring that power back under Congress. They can also vote on tariffs as well. They're really the original people who should be placing or levying tariffs based off of the Constitution. And so that's where, I'll go back to that. So that's where you can call your senators, other people you could have. I mean, Elizabeth Warren's already talked about this. She's on board. If you have family, friends, neighbors, whatever, people who don't live here, know people who don't live in Massachusetts, you can tell them they should call their senators. It's always worth even calling senators who are in support so they know that it's important thing they should be talking about and pushing their colleagues on. But yeah, Congress could put an end to this in a matter of days. So now if we look specifically at Trump and the Trump administration, they've been trying to broker deals with 90 different countries. It's really hard to be like, they first gave themselves 90 days. Often trade negotiations take years and years and years. So this is a really hard task to give yourself. It's now been 180 days since they've extended it twice. I believe they've come to deals with 9 countries. So, they're getting some done, but it's really hard to simultaneously negotiate with 90 different countries. So there's a lot going on and there's a lot at play.
But you said that the states are suing or they're trying to block this, but practically once the tariffs go into effect, it's going to be very difficult to undo them.
No, you just stop charging them. They just stop charging them at the border. The ones that are paid, you couldn't get a refund or anything. But if all of a sudden, if tomorrow the courts were to say this is illegal, then none of these tariffs would be charged, and they're not going to be charged, it seems, until after October 5th anyway.
But practically, the price of goods here isn't going to go down, is it? I mean, practically, once the price of goods becomes astronomical, it's probably going to stay there.
That's the whole question about price gouging of the companies, right? Companies can often use talks of inflation to increase their prices, even though they're not actually seeing increases in their overhead. So it's really possible that people will just use it as a reason to keep prices high. That's another thing you can talk to Congress about. There are some senators and representatives who want to pass price gouging legislation to make that kind of thing illegal. But yeah, it's totally possible. That's why it's threatening them at all. It immediately has effects. You can see the stock market will immediately react. But that is one of the things that Trump also he will say he does not react to, but there is a trend that if a tariff announcement negatively affects the stock market, we've seen that the administration will shortly pause the tariffs afterwards. And they have slowly been decreased across the board. Like we talked about at one point, China was said to be 135%. So there is a lot of movement right now, and that's why it's important to be paying attention, important to be watching what's going on, seeing what you can do, but it's a time to kind of be creative and scrappy and advocate for yourself as a small business owner.